All right, let's dive into something that's always kind of blown my mind, and I'm sure it's messed with yours too. Causal determinism.
It's a concept that really gets you thinking, that's for sure.
Basically, imagine, like, the whole universe is this giant Rube Goldberg machine.
Yeah, or like a chain reaction, where every single event is set in motion from the very beginning.
Right, so from the Big Bang, everything that happens is just a consequence of those initial conditions and the laws of physics.
Precisely. It's like a cosmic domino effect, where one thing leads inevitably to the next.
And that's what determinism proposes, right?
hmm
That everything from the smallest particle to the grandest events is already predetermined.
Exactly. Now, whether our world actually operates that way is a whole other question, and
Right.
that's what we're going to be exploring today.
And we've got some really interesting material to dig into for this deep dive. Excerpts from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, no less.
It's a great resource for getting into the nitty-gritty of determinism and all its implications.
Implications like, what happens to free will in a deterministic universe? Does it even exist?
Ah, yes, the big question of free will. It's one of the most debated aspects of determinism, and we'll definitely be getting into that.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's break down what determinism actually means.
Let's lay the groundwork. At its core, determinism rests on a couple of key assumptions. First, it requires a complete and accurate understanding of the initial state of the world. And when we say world, we're talking about everything, the entire universe.
Whoa, so you're saying we need to know the exact position and momentum of every single particle in the cosmos to even begin to test if determinism is true?
It sounds impossible, right? And that's one of the first challenges determinism faces. We simply don't, and probably never will, have that level of knowledge about the universe.
But for the sake of argument, let's say we did have this impossible knowledge, like some cosmic supercomputer that could track everything.
All right, so let's grant that. What's the next piece of the puzzle?
Well, it seems like we'd also need to know all the rules, all the laws of physics that govern how everything in the universe works.
That's right. Like, we need a universal rule book, a set of unbreakable laws that dictate everything from the behavior of quarks to the movement of galaxies.
So if we have the initial state and we have this ultimate rule book, then determinism says we can predict everything that will ever happen.
Exactly, like knowing where every billiard ball will go after the break shot, just on a cosmic scale.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get the gist of it. But how do we even know if those laws of nature are like actual forces that dictate how things must happen?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how we interpret those laws. Are they actively pushing the universe forward in a specific direction, or are they more like descriptions of patterns we observe?
So it's like the difference between a rule that says you must do this versus a rule that says this is what usually happens.
That's a really good way to think about it. If the laws of nature are active agents, then determinism seems pretty much inevitable. We're all just playing out a pre-written script. But if they're more like descriptions, then there's room for debate.
There's room for other factors, maybe some things we haven't even discovered yet, that could influence how things unfold.
Exactly. And that just adds another layer of complexity to the whole idea of determinism.
So even if we had that cosmic supercomputer in the rule book of the universe, there's still the question of how those rules actually work.
There is, and it highlights a really important point. Determinism isn't a simple yes or no question. There are so many nuances to unpack.
Even if we could perfectly predict everything based on what we know now, there could be hidden variables, new laws we haven't discovered, even different levels of reality that we're not even aware of that all play a role.
Right, imagine thinking you've figured out how the universe works only to discover there's a whole other layer, a whole other set of rules operating behind the scenes.
Like we're living in the Matrix or something. That's kind of trippy, but it also makes me wonder, even if determinism is true, is there any way we could ever really prove it?
That's another huge challenge. How can we ever be 100% certain that we've accounted for every single factor, every tiny interaction, every possible influence? It seems almost impossible.
So even if we're living in a deterministic universe, it might be fundamentally beyond our ability to ever know for sure. That's both fascinating and incredibly frustrating.
It is. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where, some pieces will always be missing.
And yet, even if we can't definitively prove or disprove determinism, the very act of wrestling with these questions can lead us to a deeper understanding of the universe and our place in it.
Absolutely. It forces us to confront some of the biggest mysteries and to grapple with ideas that challenge our most basic assumptions about reality.
And that, I think, is what makes this whole exploration so worthwhile. It's not just about finding answers, it's about asking the right questions.
Exactly. And those questions can take us on some truly mind-bending journeys.
Well, we're definitely on one of those journeys right now, so let's see where it takes us.
Diving into determinism really makes you rethink how we view time.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does time fit into all of this?
Well, a lot of the laws of physics we've been discussing, like those governing classical mechanics or even quantum mechanics to some extent, they show this thing called time symmetry.
Time symmetry. So does that mean like time can run backwards? Like rewinding a movie?
Not exactly. Time symmetry here means that the laws themselves work the same regardless of whether time is moving forward or backward.
Whoa. So the
Yeah.
laws of physics don't really care which way time is flowing, but we humans definitely experience time as moving forward. We remember the past, we live in the present, we look ahead to the future.
Exactly, and that's where things get really interesting. Our perception of time, with its clear direction, might actually be shaping how we see determinism. We naturally think of cause and effect as a one-way street, with events in the past causing the things in the present and future.
Right. It feels like the past is fixed, it's already happened, and the future is open to possibilities.
But what if that's not the whole picture? What if, from a deterministic perspective, the present and the future are also influencing the past?
Hold on, now you're really messing with my brain.
Mm.
You mean to tell me that the future, which we see as uncertain and full of potential, is actually just as set as the past?
That's one of the really mind-bending ideas that comes out of determinism. It challenges that linear way we usually think about time and suggests that all events, past, present, and future, are connected in this web of cause and effect.
So it's not just the past determining the future, but the future also, in some weird way, determining the past.
Exactly. If the entire timeline of the universe is already set, then every event, no matter where it falls on that timeline, is equally fixed.
Okay, so instead of thinking of time as this straight line, we should be picturing it more like a huge interconnected web where everything influences everything else.
That's a great analogy, and that shift in perspective has some pretty big implications for how we think about free will in a deterministic framework.
All right, let's tackle that free will question head on. If the future is just as fixed as the past, how can we possibly have any real choice in anything?
It's the million-dollar question, and philosophers have been wrestling with it for centuries. But maybe our exploration of determinism, especially its connection to time, can give us a fresh way of looking at it.
I'm open to anything at this point because right now it feels like free will is getting completely squeezed out of the equation.
Well, think about it this way. If we let go of the idea that the past is somehow more concrete, more real than the present or future, then determinism's threat to free will starts to fade.
So instead of seeing the past as this solid foundation, we should see it as just one point in this vast network of events where everything is influencing everything else.
Right. It's not just that the past is dictating our actions, but that every event, including our choices right now, is contributing to the overall tapestry of events.
Okay, I'm following so far. But how does this account for that feeling we have, that we could have chosen differently, that other options were available to us?
It's a real feeling, absolutely, and something that any explanation of free will has to address. But maybe, in a deterministic sense, just because we can imagine other choices doesn't mean we weren't always going to make the choices we did.
So even though I had toast for breakfast this morning, I could have chosen cereal. But in this deterministic view, me choosing toast was always part of the grand scheme of things.
That's one way to put it. Our ability to think about different possibilities might just reflect how complex our minds are, our ability to play out different scenarios in our heads. But the actual choices we make, the ones that play out in the real world, are still part of that deterministic framework.
All right, I'm with you. But isn't this just semantics? Are we just redefining free will so it fits into a deterministic universe?
It's a valid point, and there are definitely schools of thought that say any kind of free will can exist with determinism. But there are also views like compatibilism that try to find a way for these two seemingly opposite ideas to work together.
Compatibilism, I like the sound of that. How can those two things possibly get along?
Compatibilists argue that free will, in the sense of acting based on your desires and values, is actually totally compatible with determinism. The idea is that even if our choices are determined by things that came before and the laws of nature, they're still free if they genuinely reflect who we are, our beliefs, our desires, our intentions.
So it's not about breaking free from the laws of physics or changing fate, but about recognizing that our choices, even if predetermined, still come from us. from our unique experiences and motivations.
Exactly. It's a shift from this abstract idea of being free from any cause to a more grounded understanding of freedom as being able to act according to your true self.
I can get behind that. It's not about rebelling against some predetermined destiny, but about understanding how our choices play out within a bigger picture.
And maybe that's a more realistic and empowering way to look at free will. It acknowledges the limits of a possibly deterministic universe, but still says our choices, our actions, our efforts to shape our lives and the world around us, all of that still matters.
I have to say, this conversation has really shaken up my ideas about determinism and free will. It's a lot to process, but it's also liberating in a way to think that even in a universe governed by these seemingly unchangeable laws, there's still room for us to make choices, to find meaning.
And that brings us back to the heart of what we're exploring here. Determinism, whether it's true or not, forces us to ask these huge questions about what it means to exist, to choose, to be human in a universe that might be way more complex than we can currently wrap our heads around.
This deep dive has been mind-blowing so far. Seriously, we've gone from cosmic dominoes to these crazy tapestries of time, from unbreakable laws to the slippery nature of free will.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much more to explore with determinism, especially how it relates to things like morality, responsibility, even our understanding of consciousness itself.
Okay, so we've been talking about determinism, but there's this one thing that keeps nagging at me, and it's a whole idea of chance, like randomness. If everything really is predetermined, where does chance fit in? Does it even exist in a deterministic universe?
Yeah, that's a really important point. Chance and determinism seem like total opposites at first glance, but the connection between them is a lot more complicated than you might think.
Okay, so hit me with it. How can there be any chance if everything's already set in stone?
Let's start with this. Even in a system where everything is determined, where every event follows from what came before and those fixed laws, things can still look random to us. The thing is, a lot of times that apparent randomness comes from our limited knowledge, not because the universe itself is actually random.
So like situations where we just don't have enough information to predict what's going to happen, for sure.
Exactly. Remember that billiard table example we talked about? The one with a bump in the middle? Even a tiny change in the beginning, like the angle or force you hit the ball with, can cause the balls to end up in totally different spots.
Yeah, you were saying even a tiny difference can lead to unpredictable results. But the system itself is still deterministic, meaning if we knew everything perfectly at the start, we could figure out where all the balls would end up.
Right. And that's a great example of what's called epistemic chance. It's not that the system is actually random, but we don't know enough about it, so it seems random to us.
So epistemic chance is all about what we don't know, our own uncertainty. It's
Yeah.
not real randomness in the universe, just a limitation of our perspective.
That's it. And this kind of chance is all over our lives, even if the universe really is deterministic. It's what makes life feel unpredictable and exciting?
I can definitely relate to that. Life throws curveballs all the time, no matter how much we try to plan things out. But if that's just our limited view, what about objective chance? Is there any room for actual randomness in a deterministic world?
Now you're getting into some deep philosophical territory. The idea of objective chance existing alongside determinism is tricky, and there's no easy answer. But some philosophers say that objective chance can actually emerge within a deterministic system.
Whoa, now my brain is really hurting. How can something be both predetermined and randomly at the same time? That just doesn't compute.
It might seem counterintuitive, but bear with me. Imagine a container filled with gas, millions of tiny molecules bouncing around. At the level of each individual molecule, their movement might be completely deterministic following Newton's laws. We could theoretically track each molecule if we knew its starting point and speed.
Okay, so at that micro level, it's all particles following rules. But then what happens when we zoom out?
When we look at the whole gas, we see things like temperature and pressure. And those things can't be predicted just by looking at each molecule on its own. They come from the collective behavior of all those molecules together, and we can describe them statistically using probability.
So the randomness we see at the macro level isn't because the individual particles are random, but because there's so many of them interacting in complex ways. It's like those flocks of birds, where each bird might have simple rules, but the whole flock moves in this fluid, unpredictable way.
That's a perfect analogy. And this idea of emergent randomness has huge implications for how we think about free will in a deterministic universe. What if our choices, our sense of agency, come about in a similar way from all the incredibly complex deterministic processes happening in our brains?
You mean like our conscious decisions are kind of like the temperature of the gas, something that emerges from a bunch of smaller deterministic things happening? I
Yep.
never thought about it like that before.
It's a pretty wild concept, right?
Yeah.
It suggests that even if our choices are determined at some basic level, the way they come about with all our thoughts, emotions, memories, and everything else is so complex that it basically becomes indistinguishable from real free will.
This whole conversation has been like going down a rabbit hole, seriously. Determinism versus chance, free will versus predetermined outcomes, it's all so intertwined. But I'm starting to think maybe it's not about one side being right or wrong, but about how all these seemingly opposite ideas can exist together, maybe even work together to create the world we experience.
That's a really insightful way to look at it. Maybe the universe isn't an either kind of place, but a both hand. Determinism and chance, free will, and predetermined events, maybe they're not mutually exclusive, but all part of the same big picture.
This deep dive has really stretched my brain and given me a whole new way of thinking about things. And honestly, I think I'm going to keep chewing on these questions for a long time to come.
And that's the awesome thing about philosophy. It's not about getting all the answers, but about embracing the mystery, the uncertainty of it all, and keep asking those questions that push us beyond what we think we know.
Well said. To everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into causal determinism. Whether you're on board with the idea or not, I hope it's made you curious and given you a new way to look at the universe and your place in it. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep into those big ideas that shape how we understand reality.